I've just seen a link to a famous college at Oxford University, a link whereby someone was raising awareness of this report that this college, Magdalen College, it's pronounced, um, will be introducing classes on cultural appropriation and racism. I'm going to read out the report. I find that's the simplest thing to do in these cases. It's not very long. It's from the Daily Telegraph, Camilla Turner. I'm going to read this out and then share my thoughts at the end, so bear with me, and I'll put a link in the video. An Oxford college has become the first to introduce compulsory classes on cultural appropriation for students. Magdalen College will run the mandatory workshops for freshers starting from next year, where they will be taught about racism, institutional racism, cultural appropriation, and implicit bias. The move follows a series of rows about racism and cultural appropriation at the university. Magdalen College was criticised by students over its 1920s themed ball held last year. It was claimed that the ball may cause offence to female and ethnic minority students on the basis that people of colour and women were entirely absent from college spaces during the time period. Lincoln College was also accused of cultural appropriation over its New Orleans themed ball, with students claiming it promotes nostalgia for an era steeped in racism. The Oxford Union's governing body passed a unanimous motion in 2015 recognising that it is institutionally racist, following outcry over the highly offensive cocktail named the Colonial Comeback. The nearly 200-year-old society hosted a debate entitled This House Believes Britain Owes Reparations to Her Former Colonies, with speakers including Sir Richard Ottaway, the former Conservative MP. The event was marred by criticism over the brandy, peach schnapps, and lemonade cocktail, which was advertised by a poster featuring a picture of black hands in chains. Students at the Magdalen College, whose alumni include C.S. Lewis and the playwright Oscar Wilde, and voted in favour of making the bit of grammar mistakes there, voted in favour of making the workshops compulsory for all incoming undergraduates. The classes are already run in a number of colleges on an optional basis. They will also learn about how to participate effectively in fighting racism for both black and minority ethnic and non-BME students. Farheen Ahmed, Oxford Student Union's Vice President for Welfare and Equal Opportunities, said she welcomed the move as an important part of bridging the conversation about race and ethnicity into the wider consciousness. She told the student paper Cherwell, the university is becoming increasingly aware of the need to prioritise student voices on issues of race, as seen in the establishment of various groups to handle such concerns. Okay, let me say from the outset, I think there are certain things there that are perhaps a little bit crude. For example, having black hands on the posters in chains is clearly inappropriate. So there are certain things that probably should be reviewed. Okay. But there is a wider problem here, and that is one of extreme sensitivity. Extreme sensitivity that is working its way, I've made this point before, into student bodies up and down the country. Now, to actually force students to attend cultural appropriation classes, well, who gets to define these things? That's what I have a problem with, and that's what I think we need to be very wary of. Um, the way the regressive left defines these things these days, you could be a white student who enjoys blues, blues music, and you'll be accused of cultural appropriation. And there's other examples. So the irony about this is it's the exact opposite of tolerance, because it's actually saying to people you cannot enjoy something because you're from another race. And behind that is actually quite a divisive and, in my view, racist message. So this self-congratulatory approach the Magdalen College is taking, this very hardline approach, it is the irony is all it's going to do is further deepen divisions. Now, I'm not naive. I know that there is actual racism out there. And certainly if there's students that are genuinely uncomfortable, they feel they're being marginalised, that needs to be addressed. I will say one thing though. I think there's a much bigger gap between social classes when it comes to the Oxbridge universities. than there is between races. I think you would find that there is a much bigger gap between, for example, the number of working class students from the north of England who attend Oxford and Cambridge than there is for minority students. And I'm not saying that there isn't issues there as well, but has the world gone upside down? Has the world really gone upside down where students are now being forced to take cultural appropriation classes? This is this is crazy. I mean, are you going to ban 1920s parties because it happened to be the time of the British Empire? That's crazy. And as for this idea that it was women and minority students were entirely absent, I would take that with a pinch of salt. If it meant that they were banned, yeah, definitely that should be an issue. But it sounds to me that they are trying to get into this issue of students being triggered and they need safe spaces because the idea of a 1920s party might trigger them. I mean, I have to say, these sort of things really make these Oxbridge universities look like a little bubble of extremely sensitive crybabies. If there is things that are inappropriate, then have a discussion about it, and if necessary, bring them down. The posters, for example, but to actually force mandatory classes, I see that as almost bullying because it's telling students you have to like this, you can't like that. Because if you're a white student and you enjoy blues music, or you're a white student and you like traditional Chinese instruments, for example, musical instruments, hell, most people are guilty of a cultural appropriation if we're going to go down that line. If you drive a Toyota, if you watch a Samsung television, if you enjoy blues music, if you really get down to the nit and grit of it, then we're all guilty of cultural appropriation. And I just think it's tragic that these crybabies have nothing better to do than look for reasons to be offended. This is a future generation. Now, I've never been one to sort of dismiss an entire generation as one and the same. So sometimes millennials are dismissed as a generation of as Clint Eastwood would put it, pussies, um, as a generation of overly sensitive, politically correct crybabies. And I can see where that comes from. It's not entirely true. Not all millennials are like this. Millennial, incidentally, is not a political persuasion. It's simply the time you were born. I'm a millennial. I was born in 1985. I'm an early millennial. Not all millennials are like this. There are millennials who dislike political correctness. There are millennials who see how stupid things like this is. And so it's not the whole generation. But unfortunately, these people are being given the limelight. They're being allowed to define this generation. And it makes, I think it's tragic. I think it's tragic. I mean, this is not about being open minded. It is fundamentally about control. Control. And what was once great seats of learning, great seats of knowledge, are now becoming these little bubbles of very, very, very narrow, regressive political mindset. It's basically you agree with us or you can't have a voice. And it's about the facade of tolerance, but when you actually dig beneath the surface, it's the exact opposite. Now, if there is actual racism going on, for example, if minority students are facing racial abuse, absolutely that should be challenged. But these so called microaggressions, I despair. I really do. I really do. That you cannot even have a 1920s party without people whinging about it. I just think it's tragic. So I'll leave a link to the reports and let me know what you think.